So thank you very much for being here today, Ted. Very excited for this interview today. My name is Ben McCarthy from Salesforce Ben. I'm very excited to be here with Ted Elliott from Copado. Ted, how's it going today?
It's great. I'm really excited to finally meet you virtually. It would be a little more fun in person, but this is just how it's going these days. Maybe we'll get invited to 10 Downing Street for a little party eventually, but maybe not this week.
Yeah, I've heard they're wild.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
exactly. Yeah, I'm like, wow, that guy is crazy.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
not as crazy as Copado. But yeah. So thanks a lot for having me, Ben. I know we have a lot of people in common, and it's great to finally connect.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, thanks a lot for making the time. So yeah, today I'd kind of like to run through a few questions about your career in the Salesforce ecosystem, and dive into a bit about your role as CEO of Copado as well in the DevOps space. Obviously, very exciting right now. A lot of our readers are very interested in DevOps, and we actually ran a poll the other day asking people kind of what stage of their DevOps process they're at, and 50% of people hadn't looked into DevOps yet. So still a lot of work to do.
I'm surprised it wasn't 80%, but
yeah. So we'll go into that a little bit. So Ted, I'd first quite like to start with Job Science. So for those that don't know, Job Science was a recruitment app built on Salesforce that I believe was founded in 1999.
It was, and we made a pivot to Salesforce in 2010. We started to try and pivot to Salesforce in 2007 when multi-cloud was first released, which was the original app exchange. So we've been, some people have called me the uncle of the app exchange or something. I call myself Kramer of Salesforce, which is I never actually worked there, so they can't fire me. I've been messing around with Salesforce for, I don't know, that seems like a long time, at least 15, 16 years. Yeah.
I saw I shared it on social actually. It was a picture of custom cloud 2, I think they called it, and actually Job Science was one of the kind of flagship customers that had been built on there. But I'd love to know kind of obviously Job Science was founded before and then made the pivot, but what actually made you place your bets on Salesforce as a platform? What was so exciting about it back in what was it, 2007?
Frustration was the main driver of the pivot. And actually, it's really funny that what I'm doing today actually ties back to the reason I actually moved Job Science onto the Salesforce platform. I had been at a hospital where I was giving a pitch about our recruitment software system. And I used to carry a pager around so that every time the servers were going to go down, it would notify me so that I could quickly scramble, right? And I'm in the middle of this pitch with about 50 people in the room. And all of a sudden I feel my heart murmuring. And I was like, oh my God, am I having a heart attack or is my pager going off? And it was my pager going off, which was telling me that all the servers were going down, that we were hosting ourselves to deliver the original Job Science. And honestly, it was embarrassing. I kept on saying, why don't we stick with the PowerPoint slides before we go to the live demo, hoping that I would get the bat signal that it was coming back up. And after that, I got in my car and I drove back to my house. And I thought about maybe I should go back to being an attorney because it has to be more fun to sue people than it is to do a presentation like that. And as I really thought through, well, what was going on? Why were we failing? Why were our servers going down? And we were way over our head. We didn't have the infrastructure in place. We were in old data centers where you had to have redundant servers. It was really expensive. And we had developers who were out of control. And the reason that you would get paged is because the developers pushed some piece of code with no plan or no process or anything, and they knocked the entire system down. And all of a sudden they knocked down all the customers, and then they knocked down all the users, and then they prevented people from actually being successful for applying for a job, which was the opposite of what we were trying to do. And that was when I was like, okay, there's got to be a simpler way to do this. And a couple of weeks later, Salesforce released something called multi-cloud. And I went on and started downloading every app I could download until I ran out of 25 tabs, because that was the original limit in the original multi-cloud. And I called up my rep at Salesforce and said, hey, how do I get more tabs? And they're like, well, we have this new thing we're thinking about called Unlimited Edition, which I later found out really wasn't unlimited, but it was as unlimited as you were going to get. And it included 99,999 tabs. So of course I was like, sign me up, we'll go for it. And we just started downloading every app. And a guy named Mark DeRozier, who worked for me at the time, who ended up going to Salesforce and being on the platform team, said, hey, I think if you can download apps like this from Salesforce and you can build like this, don't you think someone's going to end up building a recruitment app like this on Salesforce? And why don't we be the first to do that and pivot? And at first I was like, oh, that's crazy. And then I got a copy of what was called Taleo Business Edition. And the user guide was the exact same document as Salesforce used as their user guide, except for the words Salesforce had been replaced for Talentforce. And it was a copy of Salesforce that Taleo ended up buying. And I went and talked to Teen Zhu, who's now at Zora, and said, hey, Teen, can you believe these guys are copying you? He's like, yeah, they're using the name Force. I'm like, no, they're like, it's a copy, man. And he's like, well, maybe you guys should build on the platform. And so that's kind of what started the adventure with Salesforce. First, frustration that things were breaking, that we were up all night during release days, that we had control of nothing. And ultimately that there was a better way to deliver innovation, right? And that was the pivot. And it was a tough pivot because I think a lot of people thought I was crazy. Like, what do you mean you're going to rebuild your software on a CRM? Because then it wasn't considered a platform, it was a CRM. I said, like, well, you're going to put recruiting and sales on one platform. Like, what's that all about? And turned out to be a tremendous advantage in the field because no one would ever see you coming because they didn't take you seriously. Yeah. Like, all great battles, the ones you don't take seriously are the ones that, you end up really suffering from. So I think it was a great decision. Now, I have to admit, I looked at the free cash flow that we produced at Job Science per year, and I realized if I had taken the free cash flow and just bought shares of Salesforce, I'd be a really rich man today. And it ended up working okay for me. But it's sort of like regretting that I didn't buy Bitcoins at $3,000. You always have those regrets in life, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's been a great journey and it's been a lot of fun, and I met a lot of really smart people. So I've enjoyed it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, it's great to kind of hear what it was like back then, because I joined in the ecosystem in 2011, 2012. So, that was after the Marketing Cloud acquisition and way before way after App Exchange and custom core. Was it multi-cloud it was originally called?
It was called multi-cloud, and they kept on bringing in new leadership at Salesforce to run the App Exchange. So every year or two, there was a new person in charge, right? And then finally, Ron Huddleston joined Salesforce. And I remember when I met Ron for the first time, I said, you're the 7th Earl of Winchester. And he's like, what do you mean I'm the 7th Earl of Winchester? I'm like, well, I met the 6 previous Earls of Winchester and you were the 7th. And I bet they told you that everyone before you was a failure and didn't get it, but you're going to be the successful one. And it turned out he was quite successful because he was like, let's just enroll as many partners as possible and get to critical mass and scale this thing. And it's great to see how it's evolved, but it's definitely been an evolution.
Yeah, very cool to hear. And I suppose that kind of brings me on to my next question. You've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for a very long time, and seen kind of the evolution of the platform. And I guess that was kind of 2/3 clouds when Job Science was being built on Salesforce, and now I was counting and it's a bit of a blur, but maybe 10, 11, 12, something like that at the moment. So, how has the ecosystem, how has your view of the Salesforce platform changed since you were first introduced to today?
Yeah. So, I think in the early days, it was really proving it was a platform. So when you saw Financial Force, ServiceMax, Job Science, there were like 5 partners that probably made up 80% of the revenue that the App Exchange was generating at the time, right? And it was about proving that you could do financials, or proving that you could do recruiting, or proving that you could use this as a platform. And I think that was like the first 5 years, maybe 2010 to 2015. Then you had sort of a second generation of partners like Velocity and Encino, who were like, hey, we're going to go out and accelerate development on Salesforce, or we're going to bring in, I would say, more sophisticated enterprise business people, not early movers. So when you're pulling in the likes of the Siebel crew to build Velocity, right? Or Encino's guys who've built sort of banking software before, and they're choosing to build on this. That's far different than folks who are like, hey, I'm going to make a bet that there's a chance here. Maybe Jeremy Roche was the first person who kind of fit the mold of the more experienced software company coming in and pulling it off. He just happened to choose the most difficult thing to prove on the Salesforce platform, which is financials. and they got a lucky break because Aperio ended up spinning off their their software to Financial Force, and it really was called Financial Force, but it was really a project management system. It's kind of odd. But yeah, you had that first generation of partners that's proving it. The second generation of partners is more sophisticated business people coming into it. And now I think we're in sort of a third generation, which is, what are we doing to determine what we can do to enhance Salesforce? That's why the DevOps stuff, I think, is really kicking off. Is that for the most part, I think people want the App Exchange to provide them components as opposed to solutions. They want them to give them the components to build their version of how they want to do things. They want to ultimately own their own solution. The CIO wants to take the solution, does not want to innovate, doesn't want in terms of build all the components, but they want to put the components together that fit their business model and fit what they're trying to do, and they want it to be reliable, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's quite a evolution. But it's the stickiness of Salesforce. That's the part I always worry about, is don't forget that the ecosystem and the App Exchange are actually the stickiness of Salesforce. There's no difference between Salesforce and any other CRM product or support product without that ability to innovate, right? Yeah. And that's where I think we are, is we're at this period where people want to do digital transformation, but they want to do it in a way that's not going to fail on them. And because we have a shortage of people to actually do the work of development, they need to have interchangeable parts, right? So that they're not relying on one craftsman who builds a special tool that's the only person who knows how it works. And actually, in the early days of the App Exchange, I went out and pitched a customer with Salesforce, where the CIO specifically said, "Hey, I've got 20 Java apps in my cacophony of applications I have to support, and if any one of the people who support those apps leave, I'm hosed." Right? And he goes, "I'm trying to move off of those apps onto one consolidated system that has interchangeable people and interchangeable parts, so that my business isn't at risk as I move forward." And I think that's kind of where we are right now in the evolution of the App Exchange. Clearly, COVID has proven that you can move a lot faster and get stuff done with Salesforce and with the platform. I think there's another interesting thing going on. And sorry to just ramble on here, Ben, but I think we're now moving to a period where you talk about the 10 other clouds in the Salesforce ecosystem, but I think for the first time, there's a recognition at SAP that they have to connect to Salesforce. There's a recognition at Oracle that they have to connect to Salesforce. There's a recognition at Microsoft that they have to connect to Salesforce, right? And what that does is it really shifts it to, is Salesforce going to build the best of breed products or connect to the best of breed products? And that's why MuleSoft is such a popular product, right? So I can interconnect all these systems I don't want to knock over. And I think it's going to change how we look at Salesforce as a platform and how we support it and how people use it, because it's no longer kind of a sideshow. It's the main stage, right? And things are interconnecting to it. And I think that really affects how people who are working in the Salesforce ecosystem should look at their career, which is, it's not now just about knowing how Salesforce works. It's about thinking about how Salesforce works with the ecosystem, all the other applications out there, many of which will be owned by Salesforce, by the way, but many that won't, right? And that's kind of a coming out party for Salesforce, because now it's on the main stage.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting to hear that evolution. I suppose that's kind of why it's the perfect storm for Salesforce DevOps, because the ecosystem has grown so big. I remember dealing with a customer where I was trying to pitch for their business, and they were just like, "We've got Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and Community Cloud, and anytime we make a change in any one of those systems, something breaks in the other systems."
It was the promise of. Yeah, I mean, the original promise was nothing would ever break, right? And David Brooks and the team at Salesforce, who now work for me, built the platform packaging, right? And I remember when I met Phil and Feta, the two founders of Copado, I just sold Job Science, and my buddy Mike Witherspoon and another guy I know from a company called Octana said, "Hey, do you want to come to dinner with these guys? They're doing DevOps on Salesforce." I'm like, I'm going to Australia. I might come back at some point. We'll see. Sure, I'll come to dinner. And they started explaining to me, they're like, "Hey, listen, everyone's using unmanaged package." And I'm like, "Well, I've been using managed packages. What do you mean everyone?" I'm like, "Well, that kind of makes sense, because every time we were doing a large deployment, everything was breaking because there were all these unmanaged packages that had no rules or regulation or ways they function. And they were usually built by SIs that were coming in for a very specific purpose-built project and then were out. And so you had a lot of tech debt, right? And the minute that you moved anything, a strut from any wall, the whole house was about to collapse. And so as they were describing to me how they were solving people's problems, I was like, oh my God, I have spent so many nights at the office all night. I used to get a letter from one of our customers who will remain unnamed that every time we pushed a new release, the massive company staffs thousands of people across Europe. Every time we pushed a release to these guys, the CIO would say, what broke? Can you explain? We need to have an after action report. I was like, yeah, your sandboxes are not sunk up with your production environment.
Yeah.
We cannot test against something that's different than your production environment and have any certainty that it's going to work if you don't keep them in sync. And so as I was talking to Phil and Fed, I was like, okay, well, what are you guys really doing? And they're like, well, we're making it so Jira and Git are talking to each other and your sandboxes are in sync. And I was like, wow, internally at Job Science, we had built a system for Jira and Git to be subservient to Salesforce as the master kind of system of record. And you're tying sandboxes to that, and it's going to work for unmanaged code. And I thought about Viva, because Viva was different than all the other partners in the sales. They were probably the first of the second generation partners, even though they were the first generation. Right?
And they're still the biggest, are they now? They're kind of,
and they were unmanaged. They were unmanaged from day one. I go to these meetings because they used to have a group at Salesforce of all the key partners, and we come together 4 times a year. And these guys were like, yeah, we're using unmanaged packages. And I'm like, how the hell can you build this software at scale and unmanaged? And it was because every one of their pharmaceutical clients needed tweaks, but it made it very difficult to deploy. And that's where Phil and Feta started, is doing Viva deployments, right? And it was funny because I sent David Brooks, who was working for me at the time. He left Salesforce, went and did his own startup for a couple of years. I don't know if you know David. And then he because he was in charge of the platform engineering team at Salesforce. And anyway, he came over to Job Science, and then I sold Job Science, and I said, David, can you go take a look at this Copado? Like they're having a DX event. Just go over and check it out. And he came back and he's like, oh my God, Ted, these guys built the stuff that we should have built back when we were building it, but we didn't know because we were just starting. And so that's the evolution, right? That's the hard part of evolution, is realizing when you're knee deep in mud that you should have taken the other path. So, so to me, it's like the next chapter of my Salesforce adventure. And luckily I've been able to attract a lot of people from Salesforce. My number one pitch to them has been, hey, you sold a ton of this stuff to people. Don't you think it should work?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty compelling argument.
Yeah. They're like, yeah. I'm like, I mean, life's pretty short. Don't you think that you should have spent your entire life selling people something that frustrates you? Because I think most people believe in Salesforce because they believe in the ecosystem. They believe in the idea of what Salesforce is capable of. Yeah. It's really not about any individual. It's about, hey, I think I can do something bigger than what I thought I could do when I woke up in the morning. And I think there's a way to execute it and a way to show it to people. And that attracts a certain type of personality, which is why I think Salesforce, some people will call it cultish. But I mean, I think that's why you have such a big following, is there are people who really, this is a big piece of their identity in their life, and their friends, neighbors, and kids and family may not get it, but it means a lot to them.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. No, completely agree. Yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Ted. And I suppose, moving on, kind of looking at the past and the present and how the Salesforce ecosystem has changed. But what are you excited for going forward? Is the Slack acquisition something that excites you? The world of digital HQs, is that something that Copado's bought into?
I think Slack is really interesting because I'm a big Chatter fan. I think Chatter was a game changer for me. And so it's been very hard for me. I'm realizing I'm starting to get old. And so I'm like, oh my God, I have to learn something new. And it's amazing. The most simple things are the most difficult things to learn new because you're conditioned, but we've kind of leaned in big time on Slack. And we think Slack may be the interface that allows us to attract users who don't know Salesforce and are not part of the Salesforce culture to wanting to become part of the Salesforce culture, right? But maybe it's the Slack culture, not the Salesforce culture. And so we acquired a company called New Context that does security. And they like the concept of us taking the tooling that we built on Salesforce and actually making Slack the user interface for that technology, right? And so those are the type of things that we're looking at, is how can we lean in on Slack as a system of access or system of interface, and then tie functionality to that system of interface. So I think Slack is a big deal. I think it's a must win. It's a big deal for Salesforce. It's probably a big deal for partners. I think it will take us a couple of years to figure out how it's going to play out. Yeah. One of the benefits of Slack compared to something like Heroku was that there was a ton of Salesforce culture already built into Slack. There were a lot of people who worked there who worked at Salesforce before. And I think it's a lot easier for Salesforce to buy things that bring stuff back to the mothership than it is for them to go out and buy companies that have no DNA or culture with Salesforce. So I think CPQ, for example, was a big win, Max's company, because there were a lot of people who had been at big machines who already knew Salesforce, who were already kind of indoctrinated into this. And there is a learning curve to getting at that level involved with Salesforce. So I think Slack will be a big win for Salesforce.
Yeah. No, completely agreed. Yeah, I think I haven't seen too many of the kind of they've announced a lot of features, but I haven't seen too many of them in practice yet. But I'm looking forward to see kind of some of the tighter integrations. But I think a lot of, as you said, it's kind of going to get a lot of people who maybe use Slack but don't know Salesforce, into the Salesforce ecosystem. But also, I think a lot of the, I don't know the percentage, but I'm sure there's a huge percentage of free customers on Slack that are free customers, but maybe want to upgrade to access some of these premium features to integrate to Salesforce and to make it a tight integration.
I mean, I think it ultimately Slack is a standalone great product. The thing you nailed it. It's like, how do they integrate it into Salesforce to make both of them stronger? And how do you unwind chatter? Yeah. And how do you unwind chatter within communities? I mean, I think that's what you really want to look for is follow Trailhead, follow communities, and see when Slack is mainstream in that is when the sea change will have occurred. Because that's the far largest community of users that Salesforce has to speak to is their own community. And when Slack is baked into that, that's when you'll have known this is going on. I mean, I think what's really interesting about Slack is this ability to create closed caption communication channels. As we don't use our telephones anymore, and as we want ways to only talk to the people we want to talk to, the ability to almost have an enterprise-based, permission-based system of who can communicate to you and who can't communicate to you, and you can go places where you want to be communicated to is really fascinating. But it's a 10-year evolution, not a 2-year evolution. I mean, it's going to be a while.
Agreed. Cool. Thank you for that. So something that I think is really cool. I remember speaking to Philip, one of the co-founders of Copado, and he was talking about how Copado, want to give back to families by making release days obsolete, which I thought was such a nice angle. Because as much as the Salesforce ecosystem are so passionate about what they do, but work is work and family is family. So I thought that was a great angle to help people spend more time with their families by making release days obsolete. I was just wondering how have you found this goal develop? You spoke about a few kind of examples, speaking to previous customers who would expect things to break on release days and things like that. Have you seen this goal to create release days, to make release days obsolete evolving as you've joined?
I think it's a lifetime journey. It's a lifetime journey to make release days obsolete.
Is it making progress?
Yeah, it is. I had a great conversation with a guy who's with one of the largest networking I guess, are they software or hardware companies? Anyway, they're one of the biggest companies in the world. And I was like, so what are we doing for you? Like, I've seen all the reports. I've seen they had built all this data on how much money they were saving. I'm like, yeah, what are we actually really doing for you? And he said, less divorces. And I think that when I got on the phone with Masa son from SoftBank, and he's like, can you describe what Copado does? I said, well, we do less divorces. He's like, well, what do you mean you do less divorces? I'm like, well, I said, I didn't get it at first. When Phil and Feta bought these billboards around San Francisco that said I got to go home for release, for dinner on release day, I was like, no one gets to go home on release days. What, are you kidding? And no, they're like, no, that's what we're all about. And what I've seen at Copado, and this is probably the most rewarding part of being here, is the problem that I had with my pager going off, the problem that I had countless nights of being at the office with the team, seeing how we're changing how people perceive themselves. See, I think what happens is that you get beat up, right? You're an administrator, you're kind of faking until you make it. You're not even sure whether you should actually be in the room with everybody while you're doing this because they're real smart. And all of a sudden stuff breaks and no one has answers and you're at the bottom of the totem pole and the business has been told it's all going to work and it's not, right? Salesforce has done a great job of selling you on the potential, but you've got to now make it a reality. And this happens with every Salesforce deployment. I call it the 1,000-yard stare. Have you ever seen Full Metal Jacket, that scene where he's like, how long have you been in country? Do you have your 1,000-yard stare? And it's this ability to know like, wow, if we don't solve these things, this is what next Thursday is going to look like, right? Yeah. And the pain of the users calling, the customers calling, starting to see that you're losing the pack because they don't think it works anymore. So they always want to throw it overboard because they want to go back to pencils and paper and rocks or something. And so that to me has been a lot of fun seeing that, hey, we have, something like, I think it's like 50% of our customers come back within the first 8 months and buy more licenses. That means that it's actually working for them, right? And that they need more of it because it's no longer a science project, it's real. We've had people come up to us back before COVID. We had people who came up to us at trade shows who had written poems to us about how their life changed. I'd never been in a company where people wanted to come to the booth and get their picture with the team. I've never had people describe that my product led to less divorces on their team because people were going to go home for dinner, be with their family, not come home angry, feel that they were valuable. I mean, I think what it comes down to is we're dealing with a whole group of people who are literally the first domino to hold up the wall, right? And no one tells them you're doing a great job or you're valuable or we understand all the work you did to make this happen. And giving them the ability to have just a little more control over their life and have things not break is the pain we're solving, right? It's the pain that a lot of our competitors are solving also. I just think we're doing a better job. And so that to me is what gets me up in the morning and gets me excited because it's like, shit, after selling job science, I don't need to work, but I don't want anyone else to have to suffer through the pain of release days. I don't want, you probably know that I got sick about 3 months into being here at Copado. And a funny thing happened. I got an email from a woman who worked for me in London, who now still works at Bullhorn. It was from Nigeria, didn't know anything about Salesforce. We hired her to be in customer support. She learned Salesforce and she didn't even know I was sick. I was getting my first chemo treatment. I was on a gurney in Texas. And of course you're on the gurney and you're like, I need to do something to distract me. And so I was checking my phone and I get this message and it's like, Ted, I just wanted to tell you, we didn't ever get to say goodbye when you left for job science, but I thank you for giving me a career and giving my family a future. Right. And I was like, wow, okay. In life, whatever happens with this chemo, if I die today, whatever, it's my first chemo. So you're really freaked out because you're not sure if you're going to, how you're going to react to it. Right. The second, third, and fourth, those are easy. The ninth and 10th, they're pretty hard. The 12th, you're kind of beat down by them, but the first is a little scary. Right. And I was like, okay, if I died today, what is the most valuable thing in my life? And it's probably doing something that I felt impact other people, right? And so when you think about DevOps, there are over 2.1 million people who identify on LinkedIn that they are in the Salesforce ecosystem doing some type of development, right? And if you then think about the number of people they're impacting and the number of people they're impacting, if you have an impact on that group of people, you're contributing, right? You're doing something that is much bigger than money. Money is only a measure of success, but success is really, did I do something to help other people? And I probably didn't realize that in my 30s and my 40s, but when I was on a gurney with a needle in my arm when I was 50, it came real close. So to me, that's what gets me really excited about what we're doing. And honestly, the reason we've gone in the testing business is that we've realized, okay, once you fix the pipeline and the process, if you know what breaks before it breaks, then you're really in big trouble. You're out of trouble. That's the next sort of iterative step that we can do. What comes after that is it turns out our customers are telling us this is, sorry, I don't know what that beeping is. I can't figure out how to turn it off. But we figured out that the next thing that is happening is this is not a Salesforce problem. This is a universal problem. And to date, it's been limited to heavy developers and coders. But we're opening up the world to a much wider audience of people to participate in the development process. And they're going to need tools to allow them to stand up, right? And that's the game changer. So I don't know if I answered your question. I
Yeah,
kind of went on.
no, completely. And I think it's DevOps is quite unique because, you know, I used to work at Conga, and so I'm quite familiar with DocGen, and it was similar then. It was time saving, you know, but it was kind of saving hours, not days. You know, I've had to go on when I was back in consulting, you know, spend the whole weekend doing a deployment because it was just that manual. You know, and DocGen saves some hours, but DevOps literally saves.
Think about how many hours and days and weeks you've lost in your life, and other people have lost in their life doing stuff that is monotonous nonsense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, okay, what is the economic impact or the human capital impact? Because I always bring it back to people. Maybe it's my recruiting background. Like, what is the impact of me doing this? If people have more time to find other stuff to be upset about today, that's fine. But it turns out that if things are going well for you, you're usually happy and you're nice to people around you because you're happy, and has this whole sort of proliferation of positivity. And we're not here to suffer. I mean, that's the big thing. We're not here to suffer, and there's no reason we should suffer. So yeah,
I love that way of looking at it. And I guess you kind of started to allude to this at the end of your last answer. But what are you most excited about in the Salesforce DevOps space? You know, what's to come in the future?
Yeah, so I think Copado is the leader in the space, and I think where we're going to lead the space is into this idea of Salesforce has a role to play as a key vendor across multiple clouds. You should be able to manage a deployment, and let's call it packaged software instead of all software. So I don't know if you've heard me talk about the fact that I think we're in this industrial revolution similar to the 1790s, where the British and the French were trying to prevent America from getting into the Industrial Revolution by holding all the engineers in Europe and not letting them come and show how to build factories. But in essence, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we don't have enough shoe cobblers, we don't have enough sweater sewers, we don't have enough craftsmen to make the volume of digital product we need to satisfy the masses, right? So what we're going to have to do is industrialize the production of code. And in that industrialization, the first step is CI/CD. It's the first mover. It's laying down the tracks for the assembly belt, right? But you're then going to have the second layer is really no one in the testing world, I think, is thinking about how CI/CD and testing are actually one process, not two different processes, right? So bringing those two processes together to me is the second stage of the rocket, where we're setting up the assembly lines and we're going to bring testing. There are only 39,000 people on LinkedIn who identify as testers, who have Salesforce technical skills. That number a year from now is going to be 150 to 200,000. 5 years from now, it's going to be 500,000 to 1 million people, because we've got to bring the testing tools to everyone. And testing is actually RPA. And why RPA is so important to testing in the long term, not just doing Selenium tests, is that you're going to need to use RPA, to call out to systems that don't have good APIs, they're on premise, because you're going to need to combine the cloud with the on-premise systems, because MuleSoft has shown that people are going to drag along these old systems for as long as humanly possible, because they're too painful to disrupt, right? So then you're going to have to say, okay, I've got to manage a pipeline across on-premise and cloud-based systems. I have to be able to test those systems. Things like Git are going to become genericized and just a component in the system. And Jira might become componentized and just become a component in the system. But that idea of having visibility over the pipeline of multiple packaged products and being able to run them through a process. Because what happens, Ben, when your website's part of the Adobe Marketing Suite and your CRM is Salesforce and your financial system is NetSuite and your order management system is tied to Ariba. Siri wants to know if I could say that again. All these devices listening to what I'm saying, but that's where we have to go, right? And we're in the first days of that. But imagine what Salesforce becomes when it could become the center hub to your deployments to Amazon and Google and all these systems, because ultimately the packaged software is the majority where the dollars are being spent, in terms of mass software improvement. And so to me, that's where we're headed. And honestly, I look at vendors like ourselves and some of the other vendors in the field as who's going to be the Red Hat for paid source software. Like Linux was open source, Package software is more paid source. So who's going to be the red hat of package software? Because as much as Salesforce wants to support the ecosystem, or SAP wants to build their own ecosystem, or ServiceNow wants to build their own ecosystem, they're not their primary core businesses, and they're never going to support them at the level they need to be supported, which opens up a big window for a vendor like Copado to come in and say, okay, we're going to build the community, we're going to build the training, we're going to build the support, we're going to build this broader vision of how to support you on this journey. And where we're going is we're going downriver, and with our Essentials product, we're going to be offering people free tools, just above free paid tools, enterprise tools, and really broadening our scope. But it's going to be deeply tied to this integration of testing and CI/CD over the next 2 years. And then the longer term vision is the multi-cloud vision.
Yeah, right. And just so I understand this fully, so Copado is built on Salesforce, right?
Yes. Copado is built on Salesforce, but we have an engine that is basically a Java-based engine that will allow you to do things you can't do in Salesforce. Because Ben, I'm sure you're aware of the governors in Salesforce that limit your ability to do things, right? And so Salesforce is it's crazy. I feel like I'm in the Matrix or something. We're going back full cycle. When I first got involved in software or learned about software, there was, middleware, frontware, backware. And then we consolidated, we started consolidating together. I think what you're going to see is Salesforce is really a great front end interface that almost replaces the middle, but it is not necessarily replacing the back engine that's doing the heavy lifting. And so we built this great engine on the back that's dependent on this user interface in Salesforce. The beauty of Lightning is we can take that user interface and we can make it look like anything we want to make it look like. The beauty of Slack is we can pipe it through Slack if we want to, or we can use a CLI, or we can let you play however you want to play. But at the end of the day, you're always coming back to the same hub.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there. Maybe I confused you worse, but
no. That makes so Salesforce is the central hub, the UI, and you're accessing everything through that, and you're able to connect multiple systems through that, and then also test through that as well.
Yeah, the efficiency. So like what you're going to see us release in the next couple of weeks, hopefully I'm not letting too much cat out of the bag, is you will literally be able to go into Salesforce flows and pull in different Copado components into a Salesforce flow and say, I want to push code to MuleSoft. Here, my process is we push to Salesforce, we push to MuleSoft, we push to SAP, Accenture has come and built, did we announce this yet? I hope I'm not letting too much on the back, but we have partners who are literally we've got stuff in the bag that is partners saying, I need to do Marketing Cloud, but I can't do Marketing Cloud on core Salesforce. I built a plugin into what we're doing so I can use a Salesforce flow to manage the deployment to Marketing Cloud or to Commerce Cloud. Or my favorite thing I saw is one of our partners, PwC, in Germany, showed us a video where they were doing deployments to SAP from Copado 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Right. And that's when all of a sudden we opened up and we're like, well, this is really interesting. Why wouldn't you want to have one team that you can cross-platform, that you can teach one set of skills that can, and then you're like, well, and if I gave those guys testing, what does that do? That all of a sudden lets me unify them through testing, because they all admit they have a testing. Well, no one admits they have a testing problem. They all know they have a testing problem that no one will admit to. And so when you solve the testing piece, then you back into the pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. That's where I'm very excited for this year. I just saw the product demos in our internal company kickoff on Monday, and I came away with this, what we're doing with DX, what we're doing with flows, what we're doing with all the things Salesforce, all the goodness Salesforce gives us, but doesn't complete us, putting those together into a complete story, and then enabling users to be productive with it. That's the next stage. That's what this year looks like.
Cool. Great. Well, looking forward to see all that. That does sound very exciting. So moving on. So Copado is obviously had quite a few funding rounds now. You're a unicorn, I believe now, right? Congratulations on that.
We're a llamacorn. We're a llamacorn because we're
what's that?
Yeah. Well, so our mascot's the llama.
Yes, of course, yes.
And so we decided we were going to be a llamacorn. And actually, I found this great YouTube video. I played at all the company meetings. People's heads want to explode, but it's the llamacorn video. from YouTube, and it's the most annoying thing you'll ever see. But yeah, we're llama corn.
Nice. I'll try and insert it into this
Yeah.
video somewhere. So yeah, from what I've heard, just kind of in the ecosystem, Copado has a very cool culture. People really enjoy working there from what I hear. But obviously, you've scaled massively with the funding and the need for DevOps. So how have you managed to keep that the startup-y, nice family culture, even though how many people do Copado employ now?
Over 660 people today.
Absolutely crazy.
I think when I joined, there were 2 people in North America and 28, 30 people in Madrid. And it's hard. But I think there are 3 components to what we've done. One is I've been lucky enough to have the resources to hire really great people. If you want to be in a great culture, you have to hire great people, right? And that doesn't mean they're also always nice every day, but they're pretty awesome, right? And so I think we've been very lucky in what our guy who does recruitment says. We need to get an unfair share of the talent pool, and I think we've been really successful at getting our unfair share of the pool. The second thing is that we have our COPA value system. I don't know if you know about the COPA values, but it's a big important thing. So there are 5 COPA values. Customer success comes first. We do it not because we are pious, but because we're pigs. And what that means is that if we deliver to you what we said we're going to deliver to you and you're successful, we know that you're going to come back and buy more from us, right? There's the concept of, do you believe in over delivery? Everyone's not born with the over delivery gene. Some people will just give you what you asked for and that's it. They're not good for Copado. We need people who want to go that extra mile. The P is people are the code. That is really about ecosystem. All of our employees, when you interview them, they're like, "Oh, people are the code. I'm really glad you care about your internal employees." I'm like, no. People are the code is about the ecosystem. The 660 people is nothing, but 25, 30,000 people are trained on Copado. All the partners that are another 20,000 people. That's like 50, 60,000 people. That's a big deal, right? 600 people is not a big deal. 60,000 going to 100,000, going to 200,000, that's a big deal. So people are the codes about the puzzle of all the pieces that have to come together and fit in. We'll always build trust is this idea of vulnerability. Trust is not about, you can't lie, cheat, or steal to be trustworthy, right? So you have to be honorable, but that's honor. Trust is this idea that I might be able to tell you something you don't want to hear, and you're going to trust me enough to listen to it. And I'm going to trust you enough to make a decision about what to do with it, which may not be the decision I'd want. But if you don't trust, when trust breaks down, that's where you have problems. I think that's the biggest challenge as you're scaling is how do you maintain the trust, right? And ultimately, I think it comes down to you have to listen. And then the last value of Copado we call do, but I'll tell you a little anecdote. So I bought chess clocks for a lot of our management team, and they're like, "Why did you buy us a chess clock?" And I was like, "Okay, there's 3 types of decisions. There's good decisions, we'll forget them very quickly. There's bad decisions, we have to fix them very quickly. But indecision will kill us." And I learned that from being sick, actually, because I remember, when you're, hopefully you'll never have to go through this, Ben, but when you are told you have stage 3 plus, I don't know what plus means. I'm like, that sounds a lot like stage 4, stage 3 plus rectal cancer, which is a real pain in the ass. All of a sudden they are giving you radiation, chemo, surgeries, and you have to sign these digital signature pads at MD Anderson, where I went. And they're like, "Well, don't you want to read it?" I'm like, "No, I want to get started." Because I'm like, if it's a bad decision, it's already forgone what's going to happen. If it's a good decision, we're going to get to the next treatment, right? But I don't have time to wait. And I know time is the only thing that I'm not, no matter what, I guarantee you're not getting more time, right? So those values are kind of baked in what we're doing. Does everyone practice them every day? Does everyone get them? No, everyone doesn't. But I did a survey recently, and I was like, okay, where do people feel about our mission? 98% of the company, now they may not all agree what making digital, release days obsolete means, but 98% of the business was for that mission, right? And so I think that's how you keep people together: common cause, common purpose, and common values. And it's worked so far, right? But it's hard.
Very cool to hear. I just think it's I think people are going to find that answer so interesting, because I've run a small company and seen it grow from kind of 2 to 5 to 10 to 20 people, and even though it's minuscule in comparison to 600, you see the culture change. And and that was the first time I'd run a company, but some of the things that you've said there are just so important. Hiring the best people and trust between everyone that works there. So yeah, no,
it's a luxury. It's a luxury to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
It's very hard when you're in a startup and it's your money and it's your risk and you're scrapping every day. It's very hard to stick to that type of system, because you have to make trade-offs, right? When you're well capitalized and you have very little downside, it's very easy to be magnanimous.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think everyone who's out there may hear this and be like, oh, that sounds like a pile of BS, whatever. It's hard to do. It's a luxury to do. And everyone's in a different situation, but you need to aspire to sort of have that type of view, is what I think. But I don't know, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Hopefully
No,
not.
very, very true. So yeah, my next question is about your illness, Ed. So I hope you don't mind me asking, but I read an interview and I think you posted a lot of content online about your battle with cancer. My family's been through a similar thing, absolutely terrible. And I was kind of thinking, over the past 2 years, a lot of people, maybe not in the same boat of you, but a lot of people have been going through, similar personal battles. And I think the pandemic, if anything, has made us a lot more empathetic. People might be in lockdown and have kids at home, and might have family members that are ill, and I think it has made us more empathetic. But you were scaling Copado to a unicorn while you were battling cancer. That's an incredible feat. But what advice would you have for anyone that's undergoing any battles similar to yours, or any other personal battles with themselves or with their families, to kind of get through that struggle?
So my biggest regret was that I probably had cancer for a year or so, and I kept on thinking I didn't have cancer.
Wow.
So I was in London when I was at Job Science, and I was taking Tums constantly, and I didn't know why I always had a stomach ache. I thought it was just that I was having a lot of fun drinking, right? And then I went to a Salesforce event in New York, and I didn't understand what was going on with me. And I won't go into detail, but it wasn't pretty, right? But I didn't think anything was wrong with me, because I was, 47 years old. I'm nothing should be wrong with me. I just sold my company. I'm a big deal to myself, right? Nothing should go wrong, right? And then I went to Spain, and I had the same thing happen to me, but I got sicker. And then I went to New Orleans to Mardi Gras, and my mother said, you need to go see a doctor. Something's wrong with you. And I went and had a colonoscopy. And then when I woke up, the doctor said, you should get your affairs in order. And I was like, this is not happening. Now, what was even worse is my wife had had a heart attack just 4 months before I got cancer.
Wow.
And so I was like, what is going on here? Like, what did I do so wrong that this would happen to me? And then all of a sudden I was like, okay. So I went to the company, I went to the board, and I'm like, hey, I've only been here for 3 or 4 months. If you guys want to toss me out and get someone else, I don't know, I might not be here in 6 months. And I said, but honestly, I think I will be here, because I'm a fighter, I'm a survivor. And so they said, yeah, keep doing it. And honestly, what I decided at the end of the day was, what can you control? Or at least trick yourself into believing you can control. You certainly can't control a tumor inside you. Okay. But you can control how many people am I going to hire? How quickly are we going to move? What ideas can we execute? Are we going to be focused? Like, what if this is it, how do I get the most out of the time I have? How do I maximize my time? And so it kept me super focused on when I was available to do Copado. I was 110% on Copado. And luckily, it forced me to hire really great people, right? Because all of a sudden, when you think you might die, you actually have to rely on people, because guess what? You might not actually be here, right? And so that all of a sudden was a game changer for me, because instead of me thinking that Ted Elliott was the center of the universe and Ted Elliott was going to make it happen, I was like, Ted Elliott's a 2-bit player in this story who just happens to move the pieces along. That's what Ted's job is to keep the assembly line moving and keep everybody going the right direction. But it's the people that I'm hiring and empowering them and letting them do their job and telling them we've got to do it. That's what the driver is. And luckily, in my case, I was just very fortunate that I could go to the best doctors, that I was responsive to treatment. But I don't know if you know this, Ben, but I do a newsletter every Sunday night to all the employees at Copado that's sort of directionally, where are we going this week, right? And in the time I've been here, I've only missed it twice. One, because I was so sick that I just couldn't peck one out. Another time because I was so sick I couldn't peck one out. But I make it like my life's order is to get that letter out. And I remember an employee coming up to me after I kind of, been through the core of the treatment. And he said, I just want you to know, my wife is learning English, and we read your talking points memo out loud on Sunday nights or Monday mornings because we're trying to work on our English. And I read every one of them. And there was nothing that was more sort of rewarding to me to realize that thing I was doing to prove that I was able to beat this thing was also impacting other people. And that really kind of changed I was talking to one of our investors yesterday. He's like, are you nervous about the markets? I'm like, I don't give a shit. I'm like, I'm on borrowed time, buddy. I'm in the bonus round, right? I shouldn't even be here. And so I think if you think about your life as being in the bonus round, and how do you, and whether you have COVID, anyone who's recovering from COVID, I mean, some people have had a light version. I've had people work for us who have literally almost been killed by it. We're all in the bonus round. The sooner we all start to realize we're all in the bonus round, and I like to go on a walk with my dog, usually every day, or when I don't have the dog, I'll walk by myself and just look up at the sky and breathe in the air and be like, hey, it's a great day. Now, do you do that in your normal course of business? No, you don't. People don't go, wow, I'm glad to be here. That's a gift, right? It's another one of the luxuries that I didn't understand was a luxury being bestowed on me that I got. And I am on bonus time, and I hope I get a lot of bonus time. But if I don't, I'm at peace with that also. So that was and honestly, my wife had a stroke this summer. You would think that we were done, right? I can't, you have a heart attack, cancer, COVID hits, your wife has a stroke. My dad got Hodgkin's lymphoma. And to me, I'm like, okay, whatever. My kids are the ones who I was worried about, but boy, they've been through so much stuff that they are like, okay, that's life. Life is about change, right? And you never know what's coming, and don't take yourself too seriously, and you'll be good. So I would say that's what the impact of the cancer has been. And what I want people to know when they're sick or down is there are other people who are in the same situation you're in. You're not alone. If you're a male who's in your 40s or 30s and anything coming out of you looks strange, go to the doctor and get a colonoscopy, please. Don't push it off. We're very uncomfortable as men with our bodies because we're proud and we don't understand what's going on. But when something is wrong, you need to go see a doctor, right? No bullshit. Take it from me. And I think if people, are conscious they're not alone, getting sick is part of life. We're all going to get it. We're all going to get something at some point, right? Play on, crack. What's the British crack on? It's all about just keep cracking on, make the most of it, and enjoy what you have. So that would be what I learned from cancer.
Yeah. Thank you, Ted. Yeah, I love all that. That's I think that that advice can apply to anyone really. So yeah, thanks a lot for that. So just before we wrap up, then I got a couple of quick fire questions. Okay. So the first one is, do you have any habits, hacks, or anything that you do to start the day to keep you focused and motivated?
I read the Wall Street Journal on my iPhone. I wake up, one of the side effects of having colorectal cancer is you have to get up pretty early in the morning to deal with things. And so I have a lot of reading time. And so knowing that I don't have a ton of time to do a lot, I usually try and read the journal. And then I like to get on a dog walk and put on a podcast. I don't know if you've ever listened to Masters of Scale, Reid Hoffman's podcast. It's a great one. So I try and listen to, episodes of Masters of Scale or that's the one I like the most. But listen to some content, and get some fresh air and get on a walk. I love walking.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I work from home now. So my kind of routine is get up, go for a walk around the park, get a coffee. As soon as I'm back, I'm energized, ready to start the day. So yeah. Great tip. So finally, I'd love to know, as a very successful serial entrepreneur, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for any Salesforce budding entrepreneurs that are about to start their journey?
I would get this book called Silicon Valley Way that's down in print from Amazon, and I would read the appendix, and then I would say, don't ignore venture capitalists. You don't have to take their money, but don't ignore them, because they're the first sanity test in your idea. And anytime your idea is something that no one can understand except for you, you're in big trouble. When you have to explain to people that if they just had your experience, they would understand what the problem is, you got a problem. You have to be able to make your problem something that people widely can understand, or you can put in terms that they can understand, or you need to go back to the drawing board. Because if you're so in love with your idea, but no one gets it, it's like having a bucket of water in the desert with no people. It may be very valuable, but no one will ever know because it's down in the middle of the desert, right? And no one's coming to it. And so I think you have to be brutally honest with yourself when you're an entrepreneur. And then you also need to be in complete denial of reality, right? And let me give you an example. The reason I was so attracted to Phil and Feta, the two founders of Copado, is that they had the youth and exuberance to just go for it. At one point, someone offered to buy the company, and they were at a hotel, and they told them the value was based on the number of the room they were in front of, because they just pulled a number out of their ass, right? And I was like, I need to be around that level of energy. I need to be around that level of just go for it. And so I think it's a combination of, you have to be irrational and then completely rational at the same time, which is why most people will think you're crazy. But you need to, the big thing is listening to feedback people give you. Doesn't mean they're right, but it's something you need to incorporate in what you're doing. Because if you spend a year or two building something that no one understands and that gets no traction from customers, you're wasting your time. And I think what I established earlier in the call is time is our most valuable asset, not money. And so now, if you love what you're doing, you don't care if anyone ever gets it, and it's your personal mission to do something that only you understand, hey, go for it. Just don't expect that people are going to want to invest millions of dollars into that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And if no one wants to invest in it, and then certainly no customers are going to understand it when you start to sell it. So make it as simple as possible. Cool.
Yeah,
great.
That would be my advice.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, Ted, that takes us literally nearly right up to the hour. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great talking to you. And I mean, you're doing amazing at Copado. You don't need any good luck, but keep fighting the good fight over at Copado.
Yeah, no, I mean, you always need the good luck. There are lots of smart people. It's a pretty big pie. There's lots of smart people out there. I think what I like is everyone's got sort of a common goal. Whenever I talk to our competitors, or I talk to people in the field, everyone wants the same thing, which is a better state than where we are. And I think the opportunity is pretty big. So I'm excited.